Hello and a warm welcome to this webinar in our now and next series looking at the elections that are happening across Europe in various countries. This webinar is looking particularly at what we can draw from the elections for the workforce. My name is Matthew Kirk. I'm International Affairs Advisor at Squire Patton Boggs, and I'm delighted to be joined for this webinar by my colleagues Marga Caproni in Brussels, Pauline Pierce in Paris, and James Pike here in the UK with me. I wanted really just to start by saying a word about the elections that happened at the EU level, European Parliament elections in June. We've also had, obviously, elections in the UK in July, important elections in both France and Belgium, all of which we will be touching on in the course of this discussion. And I think what we've seen through those elections is generally a slight shift towards a more populist result, perhaps a more fragmented result, with the exception of the UK, where although the turnout was relatively low and the vote in favour of the resulting government was also relatively low, a combination of factors in the UK election has led to the UK government having a very substantial majority in Parliament. So starting maybe at European level, and perhaps Pauline, I could address this question to you. We've now seen the Commission taking shape, the Parliament is taking shape, committees being formed and so forth. And the outlines of the Commission work plan are also starting to appear. And I think it's fair to say that as compared with some previous periods, labour and employment issues, workers' rights are not as prominent as they have sometimes been. But there is one very important new feature on the landscape, which is the EU Pay Transparency Directive. So I wondered if you could just say a quick word about that directive, when it has to be transposed and implemented, and what it means for employers.
Yes, absolutely. So Pay Transparency Directive is actually a really hot topic for several reasons. The number one reason being that women in the EU on average earn about 13% less than men. And the reason why it's important to bring this up and to level up equal pay is, number one, to sort of level out the pension gaps that we have in the various European countries. And that's an important topic to allow all of us to be more or less on the same line in terms of pension. Pension also being an important topic, European-wide and French-wide. So what is that Pay Transparency Directive? European countries have until 2026 to transpose in their local legislation information which will need to be published and communicated by companies over 250 employees as a start, and then over 100 employees on a 3-year rotating basis, where starting salary and pay range of positions that are advertised will need to be publicly available. And the average pay level will also need to be made publicly available. Then there will be an annual reporting necessary in all the organizations over 250 employees, where the pay gap will have to be advertised. Now, in France, there's not much work being done on the matter, and well, we have lots of political issues at the time being, but we consider in France that maybe the transposition is going to lapse into 2027. However, I have to state that we already have an equal pay legislation with a declaration that have to be made on a yearly basis by every employer over 50 employees, making public the eventual gap between male and female salaries.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Let's cross the channel to the UK. As I said, we have a new government with a huge majority in Parliament. And James, I think it's fair to say that if employment matters are not particularly high on the agenda at the EU level, at least in Europe, they are very high on the agenda for the new UK government. Could you please explain what we know about the New Deal for Working People, which I think even the name has changed several times, and when we're likely to find out what it actually contains?
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you, Matthew. So Labour's proposals in this area aren't particularly a new thing. It's been a cornerstone of their key messages for the last couple of years and played a big part of their election manifesto, and has certainly been one of the first things that they proposed they do bring into government is a series of pretty wide-ranging employment reforms, and it's probably the most wide-ranging employment reforms I can, in my career that I've seen, and probably not that a big a surprise given the level of support that they have from the trade unions. In terms of what those changes might be, they're quite wide ranging, as I say, but some of the most significant ones are introducing certain day one rights for employees, most notably a day one right from fair dismissal, ending practices that they see as being anti-employee, so the concept of fire and rehire, where you seek to change terms and conditions of employment by ending a current contract and offering re-engagement on new terms, banning kind of what they see as exploitative 0 hours contracts, looking to strengthen trade union rights and making it easier for trade unions to get recognition, and also giving employees the ability to get more certainty over their contractual hours where they work a more irregular working pattern. So quite broad, very employee focused and friendly at the moment. Labour had committed to presenting a bill within the first 100 days, and we've had that promise restated at the Labour Party conference by Angela Rayner in the last week, notwithstanding the fact that we're about 2 or 3 weeks out from that 100 days being met. So I think the expectation is we'll have a draft bill and then a consultation exercise around that draft bill fairly imminently.
Thank you, James. And you mentioned this idea of what are referred to as day one rights. And I think that's been a huge focus for the business community. How much of a change do you expect this to be in practice? And what are the implications for managing businesses and particularly for recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it has been the one that's caught the biggest headlines, and I think rightly so, because it's going to have the biggest impact. What exactly this will mean is still yet to be determined. The promise has been that employees will have unfair dismissal protection from day one, but we then had slightly mixed messaging about employers still being able to apply probation periods, and there seems to be a bit of a friction between Angela Rayner, who's very much supporting these proposals, and the business secretary, who wants to kind of take, a slight business focus to it. So what we're still waiting to see, and that the kind of the briefings that are coming out, is that there'll be some sort of up to 6 month probation period still allowed. Well, how do they seek to implement that? Is it going to be by meaning actually the unfair dismissal qualifying period is 6 months, and that in the first 6 months employers can in effect dismiss for any reason, which would be kind of contrary to actually some of the other messaging Labour have given around this? Or are they going to have in that first 6 months almost some lower standard that employers need to meet in order to fairly dismiss? So there's still some uncertainty about what that's going to mean, but either way, what is for sure is that employees are going to get unfair dismissal protection much sooner than they currently have. We're currently at 2 years. It's been quite, through the change of governments that we've had in the last 20 or so years, it's kind of fluctuated between 1 year and 2 years, whether you had a Labour or Conservative government. 6 months seems to be the best case scenario now for employers. So it is going to mean employees get that protection much sooner. And so it's going to bring into much sharper focus for employers decisions around things like recruitment, because recruitment's going to come with much greater risk if employees get that level of protection straight away or in a relatively short period of time. And so I think you're certainly going to see, and certainly that's the conversation I'm having with clients, that they're going to be thinking about how do we upskill our managers to make sure they make better decisions, and how do we get recruitment right, which, if you're being glass half full, might have positive long-term implications as opposed to some of the negative impact that that giving unfair dismissal protection so soon might have in terms of increased claims in the employment tribunal, etc.
Thank you, James. And I mean, finally on this, the main focus, the central plank of the government's programme is to generate growth, to increase productivity. And increased investment is a hugely important part of that. How easily compatible do you think the New Deal for Working People, as we see it emerging, is with that investment and growth objective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a concern about that, both in terms of these proposals themselves and maybe perhaps what they also suggest this government's attitude to employment rights is going to be. In terms of introducing the idea of day one rights, the government has suggested that they think that will be positive for growth because it will mean that employees have employment protection much sooner. They'll be more amenable to changing roles, and that in itself should stimulate the economy and stimulate growth because people aren't being kind of hamstrung into employment. I think the problem we'll see with that is that employers may be more reticent to hire new staff because of the inherent risks that will then introduce. And I think there'll also be the concern about inward investment because traditionally the UK, I think, has been seen as being, less employee friendly in terms of its rights than maybe the rest of continental Europe. And I think we're being pushed towards a model that's more compatible with, ironically, in this post-Brexit world, continental European employment protection. And so that could as well, given the other impacts of Brexit, be contrary to that investment. So I think the government's got a real challenge to find a way of balancing out these increased employment rights with also making the UK more business friendly at the same time.
Well, we'll see shortly, as you say, where all this comes out, but obviously a hugely important topic for both employers and employees in the UK to follow. So if we cross back across the channel to you, Pauline, in Paris, where the UK and French elections happened at about the same time, and where the UK election produced a very decisive and clear result in Parliament, I think it's fair to say that the French election produced more uncertainty and fragmentation of the political scene. There is now a new government in France. Could you describe a little how you think employment rights and the questions surrounding employment law play into this much more complex French political landscape?
Yes, it is a very hot topic indeed, considering our new government has been announced and presented on Sunday, so very new. As you know, we've had very noisy elections where a majority of left wing became apparent in the last elections in June. However, because of the oppositions, it was very difficult to form a government. And what happened in France and dictated really by Macron, who is obsessed, and I link here with what James said, with keeping France attractive for business and development as a key point. What happened is that the Macron party allied itself with one of the great losers, which was the Republicans, which are a moderate right-wing party, creating sort of a artificial majority and creating a government which is moderate right-wing in order to secure, for now, the policy that has been developed over the past year, which is allowing our economy to be more attractive, injecting money in small, medium businesses, developing the French tech, refraining as much as possible from increasing our already very cumbersome tax and social charges system. And so that today is the plan with the new government in place, clearly right wing. Now we're facing vivid opposition between the extreme right and the extreme left, probably going to try and overturn this newly formed government. But the line and the vision is clear. They would like to keep business, employer rights, and less employee friendly to the extent, it's a compatible notion with France, but this is the line they're aiming to keep until the next presidential election. So we're not seeing a turn to a less employer friendly world for the time being. I don't know how long that will last, but that's the line.
That's the line for now from the new government. Mm-hmm. And I recall that during elections themselves, the question of retirement age, which of course President Macron reformed and increased the retirement age, was a very contentious topic, with it looked like substantial political support for reducing it back again. Obviously, one of the main challenges of the new government is to produce a viable budget. How do you see that playing out, this tension between a popular demand to reinstate a lower retirement age and the need to have a stable budget position going forward?
Yes, a popular demand, and more so even a demand that actually directed for the left wing to be, predominant in the last elections, because they are saying they're going to reform and go back to a more reasonable retirement age of 62, which is currently 64. How is this going to play out? Right now, they're saying that the reform to a earlier retirement age is not financially viable for France in terms of budget. So we're seeing a shift in the discussions, which I think is very interesting, into, instead of reforming again retirement, let's keep head on our 64-year-old change. And let's introduce in the workplace mandatory negotiations on hardship. The idea being that we're making people work farther in their lives and later in their lives. So let's talk about what work has as an effect on the employee's health, and how companies can fund, put in place specific mechanism which will allow eventually to save time and leave earlier with a savings time account, or other negotiations which will be the burden of the employees on a private level, to answer to a specific category of blue collar employees who maybe feel that their lives are or health are threatened by their extensive career. So I think it's going to shift into hardship negotiations and to maintain the retirement age.
That's very interesting. So to some extent, the idea of a single national retirement age gets eroded through negotiation within the workplace. Fascinating. Mm-hmm. And I think France is the only country where the retirement age, the only country in Europe where the retirement age might be coming down. Everywhere else, it's clearly going up because of the budgetary implications and the longer lifespan that we all have. So, Margot, let's come to you in Brussels next. I think Belgium is probably the European champion for elections this year. If I'm right, you have, including the European Parliament elections, 7 different levels of election all happening, partly in June and partly in October. And I think, if I'm right, that the June elections, the national level elections, produced a result with 12 parties in the parliament, and some complex negotiations about forming a coalition, which are not yet have not yet concluded. Where do you see all this playing out in terms of what it means for labour and employment rights in Belgium? Is there likely to be a shift, or is Belgium, is the result of these elections such that, in fact, any reform from the status quo becomes very difficult to achieve?
Well, in Belgium, coalitions are always a complicated puzzle. The last time it took us more than, I think, 450 days to get a coalition. And based on the results that we had in June, it looks like this time it should be easier in the sense that there have been some drastic changes. So in June, we had the federal and the regional elections, and it's mostly the federal level that's going to discuss, that's going to decide on employment matters. And it's often said in Belgium that you have the northern part of the country and the southern part of the country, and that they're really two different countries, where the southern part is much more aligned with France and the northern part with the Netherlands. And so over the years, we've seen a trend where in the northern part of the country, we have shifted more to the right, the central right, but also unfortunately the far right. And it was expected that with these elections that there really was going to be a landslide victory for the far right, which did not happen. But the most dramatic change, I would say, was in the southern part of the country, which for decades has been very strongly dominated by the Socialist Party, and they lost the elections. They were, I'm going to say, wiped away, but they're still quite strong because they had such power that even today the result is still quite well, but they have been wiped away, which made it that on the evening of the elections, everyone was thinking, okay, this coalition, this should be relatively easy to align to the northern and the southern part of the country and form a coalition that's likely going to be quite employer friendly. Now, there is one caveat to that reason, is that because of the numbers, it turned out that the Socialist Party in the northern part of the country needs to be included in the coalition to have sufficient votes. And the challenges are enormous because the budgetary deficit is very important. In Belgium, we've been compared to countries such as Greece. And so measures need to be taken. The European Commission has been very clear in that respect. And so there have been first attempts to form a coalition. And from one of those failed attempts, what we have is a note that was proposed as part of the discussion. And so from that note, we can see a number of measures that are being proposed that are employment related. And there's going to be important shifts in that respect. The main one is going to be on employment. Belgium is one of the few countries that still has unlimited unemployment rights. And so with this new coalition, it's proposed that that's going to be limited to 2 years, which would be a very drastic change in Belgium. At the same time, this new government, if it comes in place, would also promote flexibility, really to allow people that want to work more. That's really the aim of this government. We need, if this government to be, people that want to work need to be allowed to work, and working needs to, you need to gain more from having worked. So there will be tax measures to make it more attractive to work, and also measures to make it more attractive for people to work more in addition to their already full-time job. If they want a flexi job, as it's called, on the side, that should be made more attractive. Another domain that needs to be tackled is long-term illness. We have in Belgium over more than 500,000 employees in long-term illness. So what this new government to be is proposing is financial measures for employers, that they would have to contribute, in addition to the regular social security contributions, additional contributions if they have employees in long-term illness, have to reactivate these employees to get them back to the work floor. And if they don't take these measures, that there will be sanctions for employers. Another measure that's being proposed is more flexibility around the difficult hours. So night work, currently in Belgium, you'll have night work as of 8 p.m. in the evening. That would be shifted to midnight, which would be an important change also financially for employers. So that could be very attractive. Also, the rules on overtime, it's proposed to make them more attractive. And so again, employees that want to work should be allowed to work. And then the last one, and that's linking quite closely with what Pauline was saying on early retirement. We have this early retirement regime still in Belgium that's quite popular, which isn't actually retirement, but it is a form of unemployment that is the intention of this potential new government to abolish these systems and make people effectively work longer. So that's what's being proposed. I think that once we have a government, it's quite likely that these measures will be recycled in some form.
Thank you very much, Marga. We're getting to the end of our half hour. Do please, if you have any quick questions you want to put into the Q&A, pop them in and we will try and get to them at the end. I think, Marga, do you want to say a quick word? You've got more elections coming up in October. Do they have any impact? It's more sort of municipal and provincial, as I understand it.
Yes, so there's no decisions to be taken at that level that will impact employers. But it will impact the coalition formation in the sense that, of course, Belgium is a small country, so we don't have that many politicians. They're all now going door to door to encourage people to vote for the communal elections, which means that coalition formation at this point is really at a standstill, meaning that we won't have a government until after the elections on the 13th of October. So there is an impact, but not directly.
Thank you very much. Well, maybe in our last couple of minutes, I can come to each of you and just ask you very quickly, let's start, Pauline, with you. Looking at the scene as you see it, what do you think should be top of employers' minds as they look forward over the coming period?
I would say be on the lookout for unions, elections, employee reps, because they are going to be empowered with, well, not empowered by law, but they are going to feel a need to negotiate and to bring collective bargaining agreements and company agreements within the business. So I would be on the lookout for this. Once again, topic of retirement, topic of hardship of work, topic, as you said, Marga, around flexi working and working from home, which is really a strong demand and request also for good work conditions. This is top priority for the next few months.
And Marga, same question to you.
We're seeing a lot of terminations in Belgium. I would say it's really termination season. I think it's important to remain focused also on the talent within the organization, because of course with reorganizations you're focusing on the people that have to leave. But what happens very often is that while that happens, the talent in the company might look elsewhere because they feel that the company is no longer a good environment for them to be in. So I think in this termination season, I think focusing on talent, which is still very hard to retain at this point, is going to be key.
Thank you very much. And James, finally to you for a quick same question in terms of the UK.
I think the number one thing is be prepared for the change that's coming. You know, there are going to be fairly significant changes in terms of how employers can manage and deal with their workforce. So when we get the draft bill, be prepared for what's in it and how you're going to react to it. But also there's certainly going to be consultation around it, and I'd encourage employers to engage in that consultation process. And if they have practical concerns, you know, these should be communicated so that you know, the employers community can be heard, and you know, hopefully some consideration can be given as to the real implications of some of these proposals.
Thank you, James. Well, that brings us to the end of our half hour. I hope you found this interesting. Do please get in touch with us. It's obviously a very dynamic environment in all three markets that we've looked at, and I think elsewhere in Europe as well, with a lot of the same themes coming up in other countries too. So do please get in touch if you have any further questions or anything else you think we can help with. And warm thanks to Pauline, to Marga, and to James for explaining what's going on in those three important countries, so clearly and succinctly. Thank you all very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the day.